I thought I would start this talk by playing a song. I brought this flute. It's a bass flute. It's in the Native American Western tradition. This style of flute is made from a native brother from Ecuador. The flute holds four elements. The element of earth and the wood, which resonates with our body element. The element of air, and that comes from blowing into the flute, creating a vibrational sound. So you have this interaction of air and body. The element of water, because certainly the air is comprised of water as well. And the element of fire, the element of passion. So with this, I like to just play a song. During this time of meditation retreat, I came purposely, one as a statement of gratitude for a recovery that I've experienced from a life-threatening illness. And second, because I just want to be part of a larger community. And with that, just give you a little history behind this. I used to smoke for about 50 years. So when I approached this as medicine, it was a very difficult process because after 50 years of smoking, my lung capacity was shot, But I think it was a good exchange, So, So I like to play a song. It's an improvised song. I thought about this over the last couple of days, and I title it, Not Me, Not Mine, Nor I. And I think the whole teachings come down to that basic premise. Not me, not mine, nor I. Yesterday I went for a nice meditation walk with a couple of members from the Sangha. And I thought about that. Not me, not mine, nor I. And I thought how good it would be to have a day off of me. A really wonderful day that no mind, no debate, no back and forth, no duality. Or I. No headstrong, no conceit. Not me, not mine, nor I. Thank you. Thank you. So as I was thinking about today's Dharma talk, what came to mind was the issue of suffering and how suffering comes to an end when we embrace these practices. when we really put in the work and apply the teachings, that suffering is alleviated. So I wanted to just acknowledge how common suffering is and how it really is impactful in our human heart. And most suffering is related to a sense of wanting completeness, a sense of wanting to sense wholeness in our lives. And somewhere down the line, we think that falling in love with somebody is going to fulfill that. My life has been full of emptiness because I have fallen in love numerous times. But I like to just kind of reiterate a particular song that I just came to mind. And I think it's applicable in today's condition as well. It's a song that came out in 1961. And the name of the song was Town Without Pity. When you're young and so in love as we, and bewildered by the world we see, why do people hurt us so? Only those in love would know what a town without pity can do. If we stop to gaze upon a star, people talk about how bad we are. Ours is not an easy age. We're like tigers in a cage. What a town without pity can do. The young have problems, many problems. We need to understand, we need an understanding heart. Why don't they help us, try to help us, before this clay and granite falls apart? Take these eager lips and hold me fast. I'm a friend that this kind of love, I'm afraid that this kind of love can't last. How can we keep love alive? How can anything survive? When these little minds tear in two, when the town without, what a town without pity can do. How can we keep love alive? How can anything survive when these little minds tear you in two? What a town without pity can do. It isn't very pretty what a town without pity can do. I guess some of you may recall this song from your first loves. But I think it's apropos. I think when we look at the conditions of the world today, when we look at growing commercialism, growing globalization, I've been told that people in Asheville are being displaced because of increased housing costs. When we see those dynamics of just greed, and where populations who have been around for a long time are not that much embraced anymore. When you look at the conditions of our elderly and the lack of affordable care or the lack of alternative care versus hospitalization or institutional care, there's a huge gap. In the 60s we talked about a generational gap. Now we see a much more widening of that particular gap. What is most disturbing is the plight of children. When we see how children are exploited, how they're abused, when we see the fact there are children dying every day because of the lack of affordable health care, or just the lack of loving attention, or just the fact that they're despised because they're children and they also have consuming needs. They're nice to have as items, but rather than putting the work in raising children with kindness, we see that the babysitter of kind has been a new iBox, a new video game. In my case, it's an excursion to Disneyland. And that is supposed to take care of the tolls of the year. So we're a hurting world. In my personal life, I have worked in the area of mental health. I embarked in that profession back in 1978. From there, I worked initially with migrant health care. And then from there, I went on to graduate school and came out of school and assumed roles of a program director specializing in ethnic mental health issues, serving under served populations at that particular time. That particular role opened my eyes to the pathology that is in our society, because in that particular role, the majority of people that I worked with were classified as chronically or persistently mentally ill, falling under the categories of chronic schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression, severe PTSD, and so forth. In that span of 30 years, there was a lot of innovation, particularly in the areas of pharmaceutical development. There were new drugs coming out, with the attempt to try to subdue symptoms. When I look in retrospect of how the profession ran, it was no different than having people in a straitjacket, but rather in a straitjacket, they were in a chemical straitjacket. Because anytime there was any behavioral escalations, there was a need to increase medication. The unfortunate thing was that as medication became more rolled out and pharmaceuticals saw big money in terms of these types of medication, we also began to see irreversible effects due to medications, and where people actually would die because of the types of medications that were inhibiting or compromising their immune systems. So, what was the approach to mental health services? What was his intentions at that particular time? And what was the dialogue? The dialogue isn't any different than it is today. If you look at a TV advertisement, what is new? Take this pill or take this other pill. But first, understand the implications of the medication itself. And then when you look at the reality of that and why patients don't do well with medication, it's usually because the fact is that the side effects are so profound. And the affect cutoff of having a sense feeling of your body and who you are as a human being becomes absent. So what we've seen is that the medication, although it seems to be promising, it's marketed as promising, it's not as effective as it needs to be. In the last 10 years, there's been a lot of research and a lot of work in the area of neuropsychiatry, looking at brain functioning and looking at the application of mindfulness in terms of treatment of mental disorders. And I would say they have been effective. They have helped people to stabilize somewhat some of the cycle of hospitalizations in their life. But is that the answer? When you look at life cycles of treatment and you begin to evaluate outcomes, usually what is being outcome is how many hospitalizations have you had in the last year? You know, how many episodes of home of either domestic violence have occurred? How many police calls have there been? How many suicide attempts have there been? How many times have you seen your therapist or in compliance, you know? And usually when they get measured, they're measured on a functional level only. But for whose purpose? When I worked in San Francisco, I was a guardian of a system, a large mental health clinic. My charge was not to serve people with the intention that they become transformatively better, but to keep systemic costs down, to ensure that money was going to be left over for people that have jobs. It wasn't so much about the quality of life or the transformation of individuals. So what is the answer? What is the problem? I think it has a place. I think as you know, as a therapist or a formal therapist who specialize actually in affect disorders with people with depression and anxiety and PTSD, I thought it was very effective. But again, it was only effective to a point of stabilization, to a point where a person could say they weren't as bad as they were the year before. But the degree of satisfaction or life satisfaction, when you did studies around quality of life issues, how do you feel about yourself? What's your level of personal confidence? What's your level of personal freedom? Can you exercise choices not feeling afraid? Those are not issues that were subjective to the treatment. In fact, in that role, if you were doing too much treatment, you were viewed as a negative because you were enabling your client because you were seeing them too long. You know? And we would say, no, we have, demand here. So we have to move people like cattle. And that particular clinic that I was working, we had 2,000 open cases. We had 7 psychiatrists. And yet, our recidivism rate and our addiction rate seem to remain the same. So again, the effectiveness was keeping the cost down, but not moving people through a life transformation. When I looked at that in retrospect, I applied those same concepts to myself. Thinking that by conceptualizing more nuances, I was going to also increase my own sense of liberation. But my life was a contradiction to all of that. Because something had tilted in the 70s, terribly had tilted. The ethics of professionalism kind of became compromised for success and status and money. Something became totally awry at that particular time. So it was not unusual to see teachers having severe substance abuse problems and then being glowing teachers in the classroom. It wasn't surprising to have a large organization of substance abuse counselors, and yet when they would have annual retreats, substance abuse on a personal level was on. It was dumbfounding in the psychiatry community to look at life situations and feeling that we had answers, and yet when we would go to these annual conferences, funded by pharmaceutical companies with open bars, the debauchery and the vice that would emerge among colleagues. Something had tilted in the 70s. Something had tilted. Perhaps it was in the 80s that reaffirmed that when Michael Douglas came out in the movie and said, greed is good. Greed is good. So you don't get in the profession for the purpose of helping people, but greed is good. What is the greed? It's the status? Is it the money? There was a lot of money to be made. In my own profession, I was making $1,000 a day just in consultation. There was money to be made. My life came to its end about 2008. At that particular time, I developed symptoms related to hepatitis C. Having been a drug user early in my life, having these habitual moments of what they call chipping, not a drug addict, but a chipper on the weekend. It caught up. So by 2008, life became difficult on a personal level. I couldn't maintain my job. My hands would cramp up severely. I had terrible muscle cramps. I couldn't tie my shoes or dry my feet because the liver on my side was so inflamed that it just hurted to bend over. At that particular time, my friends and colleagues that I had grown up with in San Francisco, they were dying of hepatitis C. Mostly everybody now in their 50s and their 60s now. Major epidemic in this country as well. So what happened was life circumstances wiped me out. Karma took its toll. I could not elicit answers within myself to free my addictions. And yet I had a strong conceptual base around understanding addiction. I could not free myself from my own PTSD. And yet I could tell people how to do that. So things just came to a crash. And when they came to that crash, I began to contemplate, is there anything different? I had a couple of people working with me who were practitioners of Buddhism, who turned me on to books, who told me about the Dharma. And I started to read the Dharma vivaciously, like a hungry child, just trying to consume all I can about what is this about. It's a different psychology. It's a different way of looking at life. It's a different way of freedom. And it started with having some basic knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. So when I began to come across the first noble truth, that life is suffering, what is this suffering related to? And as I looked at the Dharma, it talked about it's related to ignorance, it's related to craving, it's related to clinging, it's related to becoming, and it's related to this vicious cycle that you get through this, but you recreate the cycle somewhere else, or it just continues. It gets worse. So begin to look at what is that? What is the foundation of craving? So what the Dharma began to show me was that craving was related to the perception of wanting. You see something wanted. You think it's going to hold for a lifetime. You know, I've only been married once, but I guess I've been married like 6 times. Because somehow I had thought the happiness was in the relationships. And if this one wore out, then this one maybe will replace that. And it would be better. Craving. Ignorance. So not knowing in that ignorance how to manage desire, how to control impulse, either in thought or in behavior. I got to tell you, I was an addict. And addicts don't think about consequences until they get sick, or until they get busted, or until their family leaves them. So being in that ignorance and looking for answers in the psychology that I knew, I began in my own view to turn to God, or what I thought was God. And in that perception, I was feeling terribly guilty because coming up in a Christian type of environment, I had thought maybe I had committed an unpardonable sin, and God and I just didn't have that flow anymore. Anyway, I wasn't attracted to the religiosity of Christianity anyway. So that became empty. So people told me, meditate, Manuel. Meditate upon the Four Noble Truths. Meditate upon what is craving. Meditate upon when you have a desire, how does that feel? How can that be stopped? Understand the nuances of clinging, of grasping. Meditate upon that. And as I took that course personally to meditate upon, I began to feel a greater sense of peace. With such peace that I went to Thailand on a whim. I didn't know what I was doing. I just said, man, I got to have a little bit of more of this juice. So I went to Thailand with that purpose of just trying to find answers. I guess when I got to Thailand, I saw a mix between institutional Buddhism and a lot of corruption in the society itself, and also met a lot of really good monks. Some very good, thriving meditators or monks in that environment. But I remember when I went there, I went with one purpose, was to stop the suffering. So for 3 months that I was there, I found myself going to temples every day, morning, noon, and evening. Morning to start a meditation, noon to complement the meditation, and evening to end the meditation. And then that would continue throughout the night. But what began to occur, the anxiety that plagued my addiction, the anxiety that really controlled my impulsivity, began to falter. It wasn't as it was anymore. Something had changed. But I was confused. I couldn't understand what was changing it, but something has changed. And that's when I met Panawati, our Venerable Panawati. I went to a retreat, 2-day retreat that she gave in Oakland, California, called Mapping the Dharma. And when I went to that retreat, what I found was a paradigm, a map. And that if I follow this map, it would lead to personal liberation. If I was consistent in the application of that map, it would work miracles in my life. And as I began to apply that teaching that she gave, called Mapping the Dharma, I must say that my Hep C condition was eradicated. There was a spontaneous healing. To the point that I became skeptical. I say, hey man, that ain't possible. That happens in mystical movements like, my mom's church where they'll pray for you, you get well. Yeah. And I looked at that. And I asked the doctor, did I really have Hep C or was I just imagining it? No, you had Hep C, but it's gone. It's not active. So that was the first realization of physical liberation. I think when we apply the principles of honing in, practicing what is called heartwood. See, heartwood for me resonates something very profound. Something that I remember reading in Sutra. That the heartwood of the tree is the very essence of the tree that is the deep core of the tree. That sometimes in practice we get elated by the bark. We get satisfied with having enough wood to have a fire. But if you want to have ongoing heat, you got to go to the heartwood. You got to go to the heart of the matter. And you have to dig deep. And that is not easy. Because as one goes into one's individual journey, I'm not talking about mindfulness now. I'm talking about investigation of what is unwholesome in one's self. What is unwholesome in one's condition. What is an honest review of who do you think you are? And then going into that, just honing into that, not liking even myself, because going into that, you look at all the horrible things that you may have done in life, and it is a very heart-wrenching type of experience. But once you begin to go in that journey, and it begins to unfold, and you see that there was nothing personal there about me anyway. In the first place, that this notion of me being this solid and having this destination in life that would be eternal, that there wasn't that kind of predestination or that type of karma. But by going into the depths of one's pain, not pain in terms of story pain. We can get to story pain, out pain each other. But personal conditionality, understanding. And what's the remedy to that? It's the eightfolded pathway. It's the application of doing no harm. It's the application of not lying to yourself and not lying to another. It's not playing a con job on oneself. It's the application of being real. This is where I am at, but this is not me. This is a condition that I have experienced in my life that has created this nuance of the sufferer. When I was a child, my mom and dad split up. I was about 4 years old. We went to San Francisco from Denver, Colorado. My mother could not afford to house us. She couldn't find a job. She found family members in the city who were of a Christian background, and because my mother was not of that background, she was rejected. As a result of that rejection, she had nowhere to put her children, my sister and myself. So at 5 years old, my sister and myself were placed in an institution for orphans. My mother would come and see us so that the state wouldn't retrieve us, because her hope was one day she would get a job and she would bring us home with her. So I remember she would come in to see us, and when she would leave, I'd grab onto her legs and say, "Oh, you're just clinging." And then I would see my sister at events, and there was a fence between us, and she would pass me little daddy long legs, little spiders. And I would just be holding on to the fence. Little boy crying, saying, "No, no." You can imagine the impact and the intrapsychic quality of the mind and the conditionality that produced in my mind. The assumption was that I was not lovable. I was not as good as another. Growing up trying to compensate for that was part of the condition. Not feeling lovable. Not being able to secure relationships and keep them because not feeling lovable. And yet, when I found that Buddhism was a probable answer, what attracted me to Buddhism was the fact that it is built on kindness and liberation and gentleness and not condemnation. I was already condemned. So what happened is the experience of ongoing liberation. Certainly I'm not where I need to be or where I want to be. That's not important, because who am I anyway? Not stuck on that. Before I would say I was stuck on stupid, always thinking that, but no, not anymore. I like to read a little story, a passage of the Dharma, and this deals with a particular incident that the Buddha talked about in relationship to a monk. And it says this: an Arahant monk named Adimutta was captured by bandits who told him they would kill him. Now he was outnumbered. Okay. The monk showed no sign of fear or terror. The bandit chieftain, much surprised, asked the monk why he did not tremble. Adimutta replied in verse, "There is no mental pain. To one with no expectations, all fear has been transcended. By one whose fetters are extinct, it does not occur to me, I was. Nor does it occur to me, I will be. mere formations get destroyed, what is there to lament? When one sees this wisdom, this world is like grass and twigs. Not finding anything worthwhile to hold on to me, one does not grieve. Upon hearing these words, the bandit laid down their swords and let Adhimuta go. Such is the power of the mind liberated from the concept of self. I'm going to go over this one more time. There is no mental pain. So in my retreat, I had to write some notes to all of this. Personal notes, okay. So there's no mental pain. No anxiety or no anticipated becoming. Such as what is. No security related to one's position in life. No mental distress or imaginary fears. No depression. No PTSD. No anger. No regrets. No grief. She says there is no mental pain. To one with no expectations, there's no sense of entitlement. There's no sense of jealousy or envy. Why me and you? No. No expectations. All fears have transcended. Fear and emotional entanglements have been done away. No more phobias. Isn't that wonderful? No more phobias. By those whose fetters are extinct. And what are the fetters that are mentioned here? Are the following. Feathers are known to be as handcuffs, leg irons, feathers. Classical definition of feathers. Shackles. The feathers of a critical voice inside of us, a critical parent, a critical ego. The feather is gone. No feathers that blind us. The Buddha definition of feathers is there's no beliefs in a solid self, a permanent self. No feathers of doubt or uncertainty about the teachings. There's an embracement. No attachment to rites and rituals. You just practice and do what you're doing. No doubt or uncertainty about the teachings, attachment to rites and rituals. 4, no sensual desires. Now we get desires. It's kind of interesting. We get sensual desires. Now this is an arahat. Okay. But we get desires. On a middle way ground, you don't become attached to those desires. You see them for what they are. It talks about moderation and living. You know. So eat that pizza, but don't eat the whole box. You know. So, in other words, everything comes down to measurement scale. No ill will, material birth or rebirth. No immaterial rebirth desire. Immaterial rebirth, the way I saw that was, we have these ecstatic experiences in life, you know, and we convolute those as enlightenment experience, and then we bank on those. And we grow into this sense that this is my view, my immaterial view. You know, sometimes, like they used to say, we become so heavenly minded and not any earthly good. Okay. So there's a practical aspect No conceit, restlessness, and ignorance has ceased to be. Those are the feathers. These are extinct, meaning that change has not been temporary. When feathers become overthrown, there's a quenching that occurs. There's a cooling down. I think it's the definition of nibbana, is a cooling down. There's a cooling down. There's a quenching. That's what you thirst, that's what you and I crave, becomes quenched. And therefore there's no rebirth in those areas. It does not occur to me I was. It says one is transcending one's past and one's perspective of a solid sense of self. No mere formations get destroyed. So he's talking about the mere formations of the body, that everything is temporary. So here he's between a rock and a hard place. He's between these people that want to take his life. And he sees that the body is just temporary. He's not fighting that destiny, if that's his destiny at that moment. What is there to lament? Not to lament as one proceeds in the path, because offenses are not intentional. So in other words, in our path, we can live a lot of limitations. We make mistakes. But not to lament as one proceeds in the path, because offenses are not intentional, but yet we have to be responsible. Sure, we can become abrasive, close-minded, off-guarded, but intentionally, no. And commitment to our insight provides us an opportunity to reconcile those faults immediately. So we don't live with the anger. We don't live with the anguish of getting back, of hurting somebody because we got hurt. There's not this vengeance that becomes dominant. There's an emotional intelligence that begins to rise with wisdom as part of the practice. One sees with wisdom, not me, not mine, not myself, not my body. It's going to go out anyway sometime. Regardless of what I believe, I'm not in control of life events. That's what he was saying. This world is like the grass and a twig. It's all impermanent. As I had this opportunity to be here for this month, I would walk and clean those pathways. It's an endless job, but it's a wonderful experience. But it only tells me everything rises, everything falls. This body rises, it falls. And although I've been, not living with the implications of Hep C, I'm living with aging now. You know, I came here in November only because I didn't have my front two teeth. I just want to tell you, I'm dealing with aging, I have these issues around neuropathy, but that's okay. My brother, Panadelpa, taught me how to breathe that through, and it still gets me through every day, that breath and that exercise. So those aging factors are still there. This body isn't meant to last. We don't get so wound up anymore about our physical, but we do take care of ourselves. But it's not the priority. So he says, the world is like grass and a twig. Everything is impermanent. Not finding anything worthwhile to hold on his mind, one does not grieve. One does not grieve. Total freedom. Total freedom. Life comes as it comes. I take life as it unfolds. Freedom. That's what the Dharma has to offer us today, is freedom. That is what the Buddha is always waiting for us to obtain, our own personal freedom. That's why this place is here. It's to be a refuge, a hospital for torment minds, for broken hearts, for a world without pity. Let's go ahead and meditate for a few more minutes, okay? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.